different angles.
Almost everything that's being studied currently is about psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. So it's not just the drug, and it's also not just the therapy. It's allowing the drug to be the catalyst to like open the thing up within inside yourself to allow you to be able to process and benefit from therapy. And this is the reason why they're saying like, okay, well, I have one experience and this is like 1,000 hours worth of therapy because it is. It allows you to break down your defenses, talk about things that maybe you wouldn't normally talk about, think about things that are maybe, hidden in your unconscious because like, well, they're painful to think about.
Welcome to the Worth the Fight podcast, where we bring you powerful conversations surrounding the sensible and therapeutic use of psychedelics and plant medicines towards healing trauma. I'll introduce you to guests who, through their own personal journey and transformation, tell the Worth the Fight story. I'm your host, Matt Simpson, author of Worth the Fight, Acting for a Better World, a guide to spirituality, psychedelic medicines, and overcoming trauma. Thank you for listening. The next guest on the Worth the Fight podcast is Dr. Matt Brown. This conversation was a lot of fun to have. Matt is a good friend. We've known each other for a few years now, and I'm just always very impressed with his demeanor. He's spearheaded the Chicago Psychedelics as the Future of Psychiatry meetup, which has over 1,600 members. We'll be talking about that as well. A great opportunity bringing community together and to talk psychedelic science. And he's got great insight and perspectives on the psychedelic renaissance. We talked a lot of culture, which is always something fun to do with Matt whenever we get together, have thought-provoking conversations. So please enjoy our conversation. If this conversation and these podcasts resonate, please consider leaving a review. You can find an easy way to do that is at www.ratethispodcast.com/worththefight. Thank you so much for your support, for listening. And these reviews help us get these conversations out past our current circle of influence to our human family. Super grateful for the support. Without further ado, please find my conversation here with Dr. Matt Brown. Thank you so much for listening. I'm here with Dr. Matt Brown. Matt, how have psychedelic medicines informed your path?
That's a great question, Matt. I don't know how to answer that because there's not a straightforward answer. I think really, without going through some of my just straight up chronology, the way that they maybe have been informing my path is much more of like a mindset and like looking at the situation, not necessarily just about the person and also like the influence that their life has had upon them, but rather taking into consideration not just them, but society as a whole, also what their relationships with other people are like, and also how they might relate to the universe. I realize that that's kind of a broad answer that's non-specific, but maybe just sort of like the way I conceptualize working with an individual is no longer the tabula rasa that we get taught about, that Sigmund Freud sort of was famous for. But there's a lot more going on than just that.
You were, we talked about this a little bit on the pre-call. You were a little bit older on your first psychedelic experience. I always think that makes a difference. I was 33 when I had my first experience. Mm-hmm. I'd been through a rough, 20s and early 30s. And, I had some semblance of who I was, and there was identity that was formed. So having that psychedelic experience was really mind-opening for me. Does that resonate with you?
Yes and no. I think that my first real psychedelic experience probably wasn't until it was probably like 31, 32. Even at that time, I guess, I had an experience with LSD. I did write about it in the Journal of Humanistic Psychiatry. But honestly, my first real psychedelic experience was probably without substances, was when I was trying to experiment with holotropic breathwork on my own. This was actually, thinking chronologically, I was probably like maybe 29, because this was before I started my child and adolescent fellowship. I was just super stressed in my last year of adult residency and trying to find something to help. And I was also very interested in researching psychedelic medicine. I stumbled upon Dr. Stanislav Grof, learned about his work, and then also how he's doing stuff with breath work. And I watched a few YouTube videos, and I thought, clearly this is bullshit. And all these people are just hysterical and didn't know, they were just under some kind of hypnotic trance, and like I could breathe and nothing was going to happen. So like I said, I started experimenting with this. Just breathing in and out very deeply, listening to music, laying in my own bed. And that actually was probably the most profound psychedelic experience I might have had.
It probably caught you off guard.
Well, yeah, but still, it wasn't exactly what you think of as quote unquote psychedelic. It was very much just, I was breathing and I got this intense feeling like, oh my God, something awful is happening. And I was like in pure panic, like total terror. And at the same time, I just kept breathing, and I was talking to myself, and I was very confused, saying like, "Well, what's
so bad?
Yeah, what's the
problem?
Yeah. And I really wanted to stop, or at least part of me really wanted to stop, but the other part of me was like, don't wuss out. This is fine. You're choosing to breathe this way. I can breathe normal at any point in time. The very worst that's going to happen is you're going to pass out and you're going to wake up. And so I just kept breathing. And then as I was breathing, like at some point in time, that feeling of terror just sort of like went away. And I was just in this place where I was like floating and I was like totally in bliss. And that truly is probably when I determined, okay, well, not only is there something here with the breathwork thing, but there is something to actually the psychedelic medicines that I've been reading about that I've maybe dabbled with that can really be helpful, because that extreme fear and anxiety was gone. And I found that as long as I continued some of that practice, just of breathing, that I could help kind of get through all of the extra stressors that it is when you're a third-year psychiatric resident and trying to move to a different city and also putting in applications and trying to have a family and all that kind of stuff at the same time.
That's powerful. That's a powerful account of, I'm a true believer of the power of the breath. I've practiced Wim Hof for the last many years, and it's a game changer. And it complements this altered states path. It's just a really powerful discipline, and the notion that we don't need anything external. We it's free and it's underneath our nose. And that's a great share that you had. I know the holotropic is kind of next level Wim Hof of kind of pushing through. We did that actually as a group when I was in Poland with Wim. It was like an ayahuasca ceremony in terms of 60 to 70 people doing their breath, but it was more rah, like breathe, go through, push through,
Sure.
You can do it, and really, really profound experience that got to a quasi psychedelic state for me. And that's awesome that you've had that experience. When did you get the inspiration to start? We've met at the Chicago meetup that you've started, which I think has been a extraordinary gift and service that you've done for the Chicagoland area in gathering a place for people to come together and to talk about psychedelic science and to share ideas and to network and to find community. What was the inspiration behind that?
So the main inspiration was, as I mentioned, when I was in training, I became interested in psychedelics, and I used to talk to my different colleagues in the psychiatry department about this on weekly, monthly basis, generally having similar conversation over and over and over again, but still it was fun and enjoyable. And I found when I was done with training, I didn't really have that outlet. I mean, I had a couple of friends that I still kept in contact with, and they had some minor interests, but they weren't too serious about it. And so I was thinking like, well, how can I have more broad conversations? I also realized that, if I'm just sitting around talking to a bunch of psychiatrists, as was my experience at the time anyway, that we are going to get to the same place over and over again. I'd like a little bit of a different perspective. And I was thinking, well, truly the study of psychedelics is much more of like the study of consciousness in general.
Love that.
Yeah. And as human beings, we all have a slightly different perspective on what it is to be conscious. And the only way to fully understand consciousness or even the psychedelic experience is to gather lots of different people from lots of different places in life and, like where they've come from, and just talk about it and hear about their experiences. And then only through putting together everybody's experience might we get a little bit closer to understanding what it is about that we're here anyway.
Beautiful.
Yes, yeah.
Beautiful. The diversity of thought is the engine of progress. That just came to mind. But the idea, these groups have been extraordinary in that regard. If those were your original intentions, is to bring a diverse group of thinkers together, and to hold space for all of these different perspectives and different people coming in from different angles and different cultures and different viewpoints, and everybody coming together in the spirit of harmony to with a common goal of that these compounds or plant medicines or psychedelics have impacted people's respective journeys, and the importance of understanding, like you'd said, it's really about consciousness. And, it's such a fascinating notion that is still taboo to some degree, but it's a super conscious group that you've put together, and bravo, and thank you for providing that.
You're very welcome. I mean, it was never, unfortunately, it was never my intention really to do any of that, to be fair.
It's got like 1,400 members, right?
We do. Yeah, actually, I think we're close to like 1,600 now, or might even be over. But still, like truly my intention was just to be able to have an outlet where I could just have conversations and hang out with some people. And
that's Chicago. That's the Midwest for you. That truly is. I'm not surprised that it's taken off.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the curiosity of Chicago. It's a very progressive city.
Sure.
And, it's an ultra exciting time with all of this psychedelic science coming in from all over the globe, and the constant articles and updates and progress. Are you working with ketamine right now in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I do some ketamine assisted psychotherapy in my own personal outpatient private practice. To be fair, it's not a large part of what I do, but I do plan to do more of it, just because there's a number of ketamine clinics that have popped up that are doing the typical medical model IV thing, where you kind of just go in, you get the doses, and there is some good efficacy for that. Studies indicate that you might feel good for maybe a couple weeks, or maybe up to about a month, and maybe need a booster every once in a while. However, when you kind of follow more of the therapeutic protocol that has been done in outpatient practices since late 1990s, I believe, you tend to have outcomes that are very similar to what you were seeing with some of the more traditional psychedelic compounds, such as like psilocybin, where after an experience and also processing that experience, that you might have relief for up to about 3 months or 6 months.
In conjunction with?
Yeah, when you're utilizing ketamine in conjunction with psychotherapy.
Gotcha.
So I mean, this is the theme that we're seeing, and I'm sure that some of the other individuals that you've met with have talked about this, but almost everything that's being studied currently is about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the drug, and it's also not just the therapy. It's allowing the drug to be the catalyst to like open the thing up inside yourself to allow you to be able to process and benefit from therapy. And this is the reason why they're saying like, okay, well, I have one experience and this is like 1,000 hours worth of therapy, because it is. It allows you to break down your defenses, talk about things that maybe you wouldn't normally talk about, think about things that are maybe hidden in your unconscious because they're painful to think about. But either while you're under the influence of an agent or in that non-ordinary state, or perhaps like right after when you're reflecting on it, it's there and it's fresh and you can work with it and you can make some real profound changes.
Yeah, thank you for breaking down the model. This model is something that I've warmed up to with research and getting to really understand it. I guess I don't think I understood it really at first. This notion. I had maybe a bias about some of the healing that I'd done with ayahuasca or psilocybin, and I went rogue in 2015. I didn't have guides. I had such profound experience with ayahuasca that I just trusted myself. I trusted myself to be in a safe place and to know that I could turn my phone on airplane mode and just go within, turn on some music that will elicit kind of similar response. But this idea, I think it was when I was at the Psychedelic Science conference in Arizona, and I saw a patient that was doing cannabis-assisted therapy, and it was a very profound, energetic release that this man was having, and then the wheels started churning as to like, whoa, this is a extraordinary idea, and it's got the child locks in terms of having the male and the female therapist, creating the Therapeutic Alliance and having the therapy beforehand and the therapy after the fact as something that is really, really a part, almost a net to catch that when the medicine cracks somebody open, and there's that they actually feel safe to let their guard down and to let this trauma out. There's compassionate people there that are able to hold that container. And I think that is it's something that is, I mean, that's the model, and MAPS is pushing that full speed ahead, and it's really an exciting time.
Yeah. Well, that is the model, and that is the current model. But as you sort of alluded to, that's not necessarily the only model, right? In that you had personal benefit from not necessarily having the guides around, and I believe that model came from mostly Stan Grof's work, as I was sort of alluding to before. But we're talking about research, and in research, we always want to ask a question. Right. And then also there is a little bit of a bias, even though we say we want to be scientific and we don't want to bias our research, but we want to have good outcomes. Right. And so to create the most potential positive outcome, having that male and female co-therapist there in case, somebody wants to project something that identify the male person as this masculine energy person, or the female person as more feminine energy person, kind of work out their issues with perhaps their mom or their sister or brother, whomever. That's ideal. But a question that we haven't asked yet is that necessary? Your experience also shows that probably that's not entirely necessary. But thinking ahead of the
safety child locks that we're
all those safety locks. But I do think that probably for the time being, at least until culturally there is a big shift and maybe psychedelics are understood a little bit better, that might be the ideal way for most people to enter into this. And after they've had a few sessions where they do have that extreme safety net, it could be almost more beneficial to maybe back off from that high level of hand-holding that's potentially there during the experience, to allow the person to explore, and then but have some level of support. Again, we don't want them without a net at all. But other things like, for instance, like in retreat centers that people go to, and they claim to have lots of profound benefit. Oftentimes these things are done in groups. Yeah. I'm a big believer in the power of the group dynamic, because when you have a shared experience together, you can hold on to that, and that can help with some of the processing too.
That resonates. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been my experience. Yeah.
Not to mention, if we want to scale this, because there's no way we're going to meet the mental health needs of the world if we say that every one individual needs two other people by their side.
Yeah.
To start to feel better.
Yeah. That's a big point right there. And is scale with how fast things are happening. I just saw an ad the other day about, or one of those forwards that you see that posed the question, or just flat out said, it's like, we're not ready. We're not ready for the surge. There's not enough therapists that are trained. And I think there's some resistance with a handful of doing this therapy, of undergoing it themselves. And I think that would be an important aspect to understand what this is. I think that there would be a high value to that. At least that's how I understood that.
So I'm sorry, you're understanding there's resistance from the therapists to undergo?
There is the idea of, and I don't know if there's a protocol would say that a therapist would need to have a personal experience,
right,
to be able to administer and to be able to hold space for others. I don't know. Is there a prereq for that, or is it's just kind of common sense? Like, you should have an idea if you're gonna do an MDMA, because they do that with the therapists, I believe, are getting an experience.
Right.
You know?
So for the MAPS training, as part of the training process, they do need to go through an MDMA experience to be able to be part of one of the MAPS clinical sites. At least that's my understanding.
Yeah.
Some of the other training programs are trying to implement that CIIS, which I did go through. At the time, did not, but they're trying to incorporate that more and more with their classes moving forward, and they're going to create opportunities, or at least they have said they're going to create opportunities for some of the previous therapists they've trained to have their own experiences themselves. And yeah, I mean, I think that is most ideal, just because if people are talking about, well, when people inevitably talk about like the completely mind-blowing things that don't really make a lot of sense to the lay individual that they've experienced under psychedelics, if you have no frame of reference for that, that's going to sound like a bunch of gobbledygook, and you're going to be very quick to perhaps dismiss that and say like, oh, they were on drugs, right? Whereas if you have the experience yourself and you realize, yeah, it's just drugs, sure, but there's something else. It's not just drugs. Mm-hmm. And as we already mentioned, you can have these experiences without drugs. So what's with that? So clearly it's not just the drugs.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It's an exciting time. I had Rick Doblin on the show, episode number 10, and we had talked and done a little forecasting. I read about in Worth the Fight. I reference a State of the Union. It was almost like a psychedelic State of the Union that he had done with Aubrey Marcus back in 2018, and doing a forecast, and the year was 2035. For a post-prohibition world, if things move as planned. And, I had him on the show 2 years removed from that episode, and that is still a forecast. And what are your thoughts on that?
That sounds pretty good. I mean, pretty close. I'd say 15, 20 years is very, very realistic. That might sound like a far out time frame to some people, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not all that far out. I do think that we'll see more inroads previous to that, of course. Both psilocybin and MDMA already being in phase 3. Mm-hmm. So
breakthrough therapies, labeled breakthrough therapies by the FDA.
Yeah, which basically just means that the FDA has stated that they feel like they have a little bit of a vested interest in paying attention to this and helping it move forward, since the outcomes are favorable. But it does not necessarily mean that's a green light no matter what. Mm-hmm. However, with the outcomes that we're seeing from the research, the MAPS research in particular, with the phase 2 with the PTSD, it's just completely unheard of. And please forgive me, because I know the numbers. I'm a little bit off. What is it? 67%.
67%.
Okay, good. Thank you.
In phase 2 clinical trials were symptom-free a year later.
Right.
And that number goes up. When they're 3-4 years out, I think that it goes up to 72%.
And that's the thing, because I always get stuck in the 67%, and because that's the time when I was reading about it. And there's so much to read, and you can't always stay on top of everything.
Yeah.
But the fact that, first of all, 67% no longer meet criteria for PTSD after a year of treatment, and more people no longer meet criteria for PTSD even further out than that. These are unheard of outcomes in the mental health
for the most troubled patients. These are
Correct.
People with chronic. I think the average is 17 years of having the condition. Yep. So I mean, these are people that psychiatry and basically everybody's given up on, and to some degree, and they're having these profound experiences. So it's very encouraging science and news.
Right. And this is why we need to look at this more, and we need to figure out ways of being smart and getting these treatments and or similar types of treatments out sooner rather than later, because it seems to be significantly better than the status quo.
Is there anything that is on your radar? Any concerns that are on your radar? Maybe something that you're passionate about that not many people in the psychedelic community are talking about?
I mean, the biggest concern that we were kind of talking about here before we turned on, which this might date this conversation, but coming up on Friday here in Chicago, there's going to be a hearing about decriminalizing all plant medicines, which, for the record, I am all for. I don't think that anybody needs to be put in jail for holding a plant that or a fungus. Also, we don't want to upset anyone for not including the funguses, an entire kingdom that we often
Yeah.
ignore. And also that any sort of substance use issues ought to be treated as mental health issues rather than criminal issues, because like that just seems ridiculous, because clearly these folks are self-medicating. But the one thing that I think that we want to be mindful of is when we start doing these, making these efforts to make things a little bit, well, more reasonable and fair, is that most individuals, they don't understand the concept of both decriminalization versus legalization. So first of all, a lot of people are going to say, okay, well, now that means that any kind of a plant medicine I want to use, I can use in Chicago, and that's fine. And maybe I can even give that treatment to other people, even though I have no training in that whatsoever.
Scary. It's a scary notion.
Right. And so that is the thing that I am concerned about. And honestly, the substances themselves, probably fine. I mean, they're tools. Most people, if you're going to take it by yourself, most people do okay with them. Every once in a while, some people do have problems, but all tools can be used for in positive ways and also negative ways. And so my big concern, which is part of the concern with the current method that a lot of people are getting treatment with psychedelic medicine, being that we have potentially some nefarious individuals because we're not vetting any of these people providing the treatments. And what am I talking about? We're talking about like people who might start to sexually abuse clients who are under the influence of psychedelics. I mean, that happens at retreat centers. Or people that are trying to somehow influence others to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do.
When they're in that suggestible state of mind.
Exactly. And this might sound alarmist, and I'm not trying to be alarmist, but I mean, like the two most prominent examples of something like this would be number one, and this isn't somebody actually, the negative effect of, this is much more of like a lack of consent. If you were to dose somebody, but like with the MK Ultra experiments, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, came out of that, right? And supposedly I
didn't know that until today.
Really?
No,
okay.
Yeah.
No, go look it up.
Okay.
Yeah. So through the being dosed with LSD, he came up with this theory that technology is evil and is going to destroy the world. So he had to kill the technologist so that he could save the world, which makes sense. And he thought he was doing a good thing. But really, this was kind of a distorted view of reality, and it was causing a lot of like pain and destruction, right? And so this is why, and he did not know that he was being dosed.
That's a sick notion of dosing somebody without their consent. It just is a horrible. I've heard about that. I've heard even that there's a term for it. It's called washing or something.
Oh, okay.
I'd had a conversation with somebody in Los Angeles about that, and apparently, there's groups of people that would do that to their friends. Yeah. And it's a horrific thing to be. It's a challenging thing enough to do consciously when we make positive intentions, but then to be thrown into what would feel like a break, a psychotic break.
100%.
If you're going, hey, going to the grocery store and you're coming back home and you got your Trader Joe's bags, and the next thing you know, you're going off into La La Land. I mean, that's just not
it's terrifying.
Cool.
It's terrifying. The other big example is Charles Manson, notoriously used LSD to influence his cult members to do things such as murder. Now, again, I realize this is almost being alarmist, and this is very much like saying, well, we shouldn't drive cars because people die in cars.
Yeah, these are two instances. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time, I think that it's important to remember that it's not all unicorns and rainbows all the time, and that possibly bad things can happen.
And that's the importance of, and I'm really excited about where we're at in this movement, the idea of set and setting being so pronounced, and something that is there was a post that the ladies from Double Blind had put out. I think Madison had put that out. She put a notation of that hopefully we're reaching a time where our set and setting in a psychedelic experience would be comparable to like not drinking and driving. It's like geez, there's a big responsibility here, and especially as we get closer to a real sustainable change happening for people that are really hurting right now. So the idea of these other aspects to complement the notions like set and setting, and having this breathwork craze and this Wim Hof craze, and I talk so often about these other tools that have meant so much to me on my journey. I just had, Nick Midar, who sources the most incredible raw organic ceremonial cacao that we're having a glass of right now.
It's quite delicious.
And the power of full spectrum medicine. We have all these different medicines to choose from. And I think that we're waking up to the idea that we can deploy these medicines, this full spectrum, based on where we are at any given time and our goals and intentions.
Agreed.
Awesome. We're going to take a little detour here. I want to get back to belief systems. As we talked about, you were a little bit older when you had your first psychedelic, really profound psychedelic experience. And, I think that there's a Carl Jung quote where he questioned whether these medicines were lost on the young and should be for people looking to negotiate the second half of their life. And certainly we were still in the younger phase. So maybe that's not a poignant comment, but the idea of what were your fears beforehand, or what was your biggest surprise with having gone through a profound experience that maybe, again, was a big surprise, something that was a big takeaway from that first experience, maybe a limiting belief or something that, a fearful, or as I affectionately say in Worth the Fight, a bullshit incorporated limiting belief. Were there anything that come to mind for you?
I mean, from the breathwork experience was that there's merit here. I think from any of my psychedelic experiences, so I did an ayahuasca and San Pedro retreat in Peru.
Where was that, in Iquitos?
No, it was in the Sacred Valley area outside of Machu Picchu. But still, the thing I got from that was my experiences were nothing like what I expected them to be, especially with ayahuasca, because I maybe had some visions, although it took me a long time to understand that I even had visions. I probably had like maybe 8 pictures just flash in front of my eyes. The experience was extremely, extremely physical. And 3 of the 4 experiences were not a lot happened at all. And so I think that the biggest thing that came from that was, well, first of all, I felt a little let down at first, but then after I started to unpack it, I think that that's exactly what I needed at the time. And that's kind of maybe the message I'm saying is like, so oftentimes when somebody has a psychedelic experience, they were expecting one thing, but something else happened. That thing that happened might have been the thing that maybe needed to happen rather than the thing that you want to happen. And it's very important to go into any of these things with an open mind, such that you can be kind of disappointed, but that's okay.
Yeah, it's definitely, that resonates. The idea that we don't always get what we want, but we get what we need.
That's right.
And, trying to limit the expectation, and there can be profound takeaways from coming in with heavy with all these expectations, and to not have the color show or the visual show or the visions, and it's such a wonderfully unique experience that is always so engaging to talk about, to hear other people's experiences. And you said you had some experience with San Pedro as well. What were your thoughts and impressions with San Pedro?
San Pedro was great. I don't know. So there were only 2. There were definitely some visuals with that. Interestingly, so the second time though, it was just very grandiose and distracted. Did I get a lot out of it? Not sure. Most probably because the ayahuasca experience is like crowded out, I think, what was going on from the San Pedro.
What was the time frames? Were they kind of
right
on top of
so
each other?
The whole experience, the way the retreat was set up, and I'm not sure if like energetically this is the best way of doing things. And also, as a side note, we as a field have a really hard time with vocabulary because we use energy for everything, and it all has different meanings, and it makes sense, but we're just we're sounding like a bunch of woo hippies, but it's not really that. But anyway, energetically, maybe not the best thing. But the way that it was set up is there was 4 ayahuasca experiences. They were bookended by a San Pedro experience on the front end and a San Pedro experience on the back end.
Okay.
Talking to some other traditional healers that I was meeting with, like after being in that retreat setting, they were like, who the hell would ever set that up? That doesn't even make sense. Because like really, you got to just focus on the ayahuasca. But then again, other people are saying like, you can do whatever. Yeah. But,
yeah, we were talking about San Pedro.
what did I get out of that? Not a lot. It was fun.
Yeah.
Saw some stuff. I'd like to work with that again. Because for me, that might have been one of the more, I don't know if pleasurable is the right word, but one of the medicines that I felt that I could trust more, if that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah. My experience with San Pedro was I had the most, like it was very physical, and I felt these surges of power and strength, and almost the distorted view of my body was like, I remember looking at my arms and looking at, it's like, whoa, like, man, have you been pumping iron? Like what's going on here? And I sometimes think, as I've gotten into, fitness and working out and weights and whatnot, if like that, potentially that visualization of seeing almost a greater expression is driving some of my, or fueling some of my health initiatives that I have going on in my life. And these medicines have been very visual for me. And I've witnessed a physical expression that is, and with ayahuasca too, that is just, it's just not who I am, but it's a positive version of Matt that I'm working towards. And I think that that's another maybe understated value of these medicines, that in a safe place you can go to that and you could let your mind open and really, see what's behind the curtains of your subconscious mind.
Yeah. I like the way you put that. The positive, what do you say? Positive version of Matt that you're driving towards. Although I might argue that it's like, it almost shows you the essence of yourself, which at least for me feels positive, that I am trying to allow to express itself and not let all of the, everything that's going on in this meat vehicle get in the way.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah. 'Cause there's so many blockages and different things that we do to sabotage that. And I think seeing is believing. And when we let ourselves go, we can't, there's that old adage, you can't unsee something. You just can't. And, I always think that we visualize something before we bring it forth into a reality. And when we're in an elevated state of vibration, and we're having visualizations, that those experiences are emotionalized, there's a higher likelihood of bringing said immaterial into the material world.
Yeah. Although, yes, so you can bring that emotional material into the real world, but then what are you going to do with it? And that's where we get back into the whole concept of integration, which is much more bringing the logical side of things and trying to join the emotional side of things with the logical side of things, and using our logic to figure out, okay, well, what does this really mean? Yeah. Because the feelings are very profound, the feelings are very real, but still those feelings might be very, very difficult to translate. And then you start to logically notice and realize that you have lots of feelings in your everyday life that may or may not be accurate. And those were always there. And this is the crux of traditional psychotherapy, is just identifying like your emotions, your reactions to them, and like thinking about what you think about them. But I think that psychedelics really like bring that home, and you can really almost, there's like a feeling or an embodiment of, oh yeah, like maybe these things that I'm feeling, even though they're real, they're not really real, but they are real, but I get to choose my reality.
Ooh, I like that choice. And I think that's the integration. That's the daily practice.
Yeah.
That's, how serious do we want to be in filtering out the BS and focusing our life force and our energy and our attention on our dreams, on our heart's desires. And I think that I'm a big, and I appreciate you mentioning integration, that it's, I'm a big believer. It's not about the peak experience at all. It's about what are you doing with these profound experiences? How are you grounding this energy and putting it in service to your growth, your loved ones, and your circles of influence and the natural world? And integration is the key to really bringing forth these visions. I think I love that, and I've said this on a couple episodes. Jason Silva has referenced it as inverse PTSD, and I love that idea. That just as I've before I engaged psychedelic medicines, I had all of these traumatic memories in my nervous system. Just as those were stored in there, these high vibe peak experiences of bliss and enlightenment and joy and unbridled ecstasy, those experiences are stored in my nervous system just the same way.
Yep.
And to access them, I access them through meditation, through yoga, through fasting, through eating healthy, through flow states, through drinking my raw organic ceremonial cacao, coffee, bulletproof hack, all these different things get me in touch with that to varying degrees.
Yeah, and this is a topic that I kind of talked about too at Terra a few years ago. I think we were calling Becoming the Beacon, but like that idea that it seems like you're very much like turned on like a light after you have these things, and that energy resonates out, and then it can like turn other people on. But over time, it actually does fade. Interestingly, we're sitting here talking right now. I kind of feel like a lot of my light has faded here recently, because like I've not had a full psychedelic experience for quite some time. I do utilize my own personal breathwork technique, not as regularly as I would like, but at least enough to continue getting by. But it is interesting to just to realize that we're all susceptible of, we can get turned on and get in that place where everything is great. We see ourselves moving forward, and also, let's be honest, like a little bit of the grandiosity that we feel like we can kind of like save the world and do everything. This is just a natural experience. I think a lot of people have after psychedelics, which is may or may not be entirely accurate, and that's okay. But also, if you kind of not necessarily ignore that, but if you get caught up in the quote unquote real world, it can drag you back, and it's kind of hard to find that place again that allows you to be that light and to help other people find that light. And I'm working on getting back there. We'll see what happens.
Well, you're doing beautiful work for our human family, and you are a beacon. And I get what you're saying, that sometimes that light will flicker from time to time, or it becomes not as accessible, and that's one of the beauties of being human, but also the challenges of having a family and running a practice and doing all the awesome things that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, we talked a little bit on the pre-call, and I always like this because we dive into this topic often, and we were talking about Bob Stanley Otis and having him on the show, and I scratch my head often, and I'm just like, how can other people not see what I see when it comes to the church being a fake authoritarian power that has no merit? And a big central part of my messaging is, and after doing this extensive work with our warriors and our veterans, is seeing and connecting the dots that this unchecked, and I believe this to be true, this unchecked child sex abuse that the church perpetuates is at war, or is at root for the war, a high majority of the war and conflict we see here on earth. And I think that we've reached a time where people sitting on the sidelines on this, parishioners sitting on the sidelines ignoring this truth, makes them just as guilty as the pedophile priests. What are your thoughts on that? I know I threw a lot at you there, but I know we
Yeah,
have similar.
so in the talking about like the pre-call thing, I mean, we didn't get into the child abuse quite as much. I know you mentioned it, and I do think that this is problematic. I kind of view it more as just the nature of institutions and how they become perverted and corrupted over time, and certainly the Catholic Church having. I mean, throughout the years, they've done a lot of harm, really. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. I mean, starting with the Crusades at the very least, or perhaps Spanish Inquisition, or, all the childhood sexual abuse, or, name one of the other things that they've done. But really, the way I look at this is all about kind of like power and incentive structures. Because, like, initially, most churches, religions, they start off pretty pure, honestly, and the people leading them, they have an honest message. And to be fair, even the Catholic Church, like what they preach, it sounds pretty good, right? And I think that there were best intentions there. However, once you start putting structures in place, and you have an institution behind it, and then the initial leaders are no longer there, that structure becomes like an incentive process to corrupt everybody involved in it, because all that they want to do is keep that structure going, and also trying to figure out, okay, how can I navigate and ensure the most power for myself? Then, when you have such powerful structures such as the church that, clearly the priest must think that they have enough power that they're able to do these atrocious things. And it's actually not that big of a deal because, hey, you know what? I'm a priest and God will forgive me or something. Actually, I don't know what's going on in their minds. But this is,
I love that.
I don't know.
Probably not that far off.
Yeah.
But like that's some an evil priest's self-talk, and you pegged it pretty good.
Well, how else can you? I mean, seriously, how else can you justify sexually violating a child? Like, I don't know. Like, you have to be able to talk to yourself into it, because it's just like, I would hope that just about anyone would think like, oh, that's really not a good thing to do. But you got to figure out, like, well, how do people convince themselves that any of the evil things that anyone does is a good thing? Like we're going back to, well, no, I don't want to go back to there, but like anything that anybody brings up that is horrible, like they have to be able to say that, well, no, there's actually something positive from this, or maybe it's not that bad.
And the worst part about this is that this abuse, it's latent. One priest, can have one experience on a child, and that one maybe 5 or 10 minute encounter could ruin someone's life.
Yeah.
And it's sneaky and it's nefarious, and that, when I say latent, meaning that the harm and the after effects aren't showing up until later in life, generally. Late 20s, early 30s. People are having a really challenging time connecting, substance abuse, addiction, all these different things from suppressing it, and then it has to come out.
Yeah, I might argue that it only comes out later in life, almost if you're lucky. So, like, I've done a fair amount of work with children with significant trauma, like at a very young age, and it is absolutely the case that if you want to ruin somebody's life, like if you want to ruin a child's life, have sex with a kid. That is the surest way of ruining their life. And some kids that shows right away. The one story that comes to mind that's burned in my memory that I cannot forget is there were two twins that were horribly sexually abused by I don't know if there was there probably was their biological parents, and that's why they got put into foster care. And they were identical twins, and they were made to do sex acts on adults as well as each other. And we were working with them, and we, for whatever reason, the attending psychiatrist I was working with, they thought, well, let's play with dolls, see what happens. And we had some anatomically correct dolls there, right? But they were fully clothed and stuff. So we just said, hey, kids, play with the dolls. And the kids, being kids, they were like pulling off the clothes as they do, and then they realized they were anatomically correct, and then immediately they started reenacting this trauma and fake performing sex acts on these dolls, and it was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I don't know what happened to those kids, but yeah, that's the most profound example. But like teenagers, like I've worked in a lot of inpatient hospitals. You would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how many of those teenagers that are inpatient in the hospital because, like, when they were 6 or 7, their uncle decided, they wanted to have some fun and they decided to abuse a kid.
Yeah. Troubling. It's very, very troubling. And and I know I've cited this and I'm going to do it again. Sebastian Junger, he wrote the book Tribe. His research shows that modern day veterans that fought in Iraq and Afghanistan were 2 times more likely to have reported childhood sexual trauma in the early years of childhood development. Mind you, I said reported. Anybody that knows anything about we're talking about sexual shame, like you said, it often just doesn't get reported.
Right.
People would rather bite a bullet. They'd rather just end their life than utter those words. They're horribly painful words to get out after storing and protecting for so long. And the idea that this abuse is driving people to go to the service because they're not. When one has trauma in their nervous system, it's very difficult to have authentic connection. It's very challenging to have familial relationships, intimate relationships. It's nearly impossible. And so they go to war. They find brotherhood. They find tribe. You're always with somebody. And you're living. It's primal. But when you come back home to your tribe back here or your familial, there's not they don't have the resilience. They don't have the support group. They're going back into these unhealthy, toxic positions. They all have guns. They've seen some awful shit in the Middle East. Thus, we have 22 veterans that die by their own hand each day. I believe that 10 to 15% of the homeless population are veterans. There's countless that are stuck in self-abuse, drugs, alcohol, opioids. It's a big fucking mess.
It is a big fucking mess.
And I think, I've spent a lot of time, and I write about this extensively in Worth the Fight, and have done a lot of thinking about what I affectionately call, thank you, Stephen Pressfield, bullshit incorporated programs. That where Bullshit Inc. is the weakest is the church, because the church doesn't have merit. And that's why I'm beating this drum to get this out. And we've gotten into it a little bit deeper in this conversation, and probably the cacao, but this is something that's near and dear to me, and I truly believe in my heart of hearts that if we get a handle on this child sex plague that affects 1 in 5 of us, that we get a handle on a lot of these other big challenges for our human family as well.
Sure. Although I want to be a little bit careful here. As much as we can demonize the Catholic Church broadly, or maybe even all religions
I'm
broadly.
demonizing the abuse.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And I think there's beautiful people. I know I have many friends that are Catholic, and they're
Sure.
beautiful people, and yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, these institutions, they continue to exist not just because of the power play of the institutions, but a lot of people actually do find benefit from just having a place where they can go where people can tell them sort of how to live, because we have no guidebook for how to live life.
Certainty, yeah, that's the certainty. Is
very
powerful.
And then also community.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these things, they generally, when you go to these places, most of the individuals that you encounter there are there for positive reasons, right? More so than if you just met somebody, I don't know, at a bar or something like that, right? So, there is some good, but yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that we are in a very interesting time in that majority of our institutions are being questioned currently, and I think that perhaps rightfully so. I think that we're going to see lots of change with a lot of different things coming up in the next probably 20 years. What everything's going to look like whenever that shakes out, I do not know. But I think it's reasonable to kind of keep an eye on these things and try to maybe go towards, or really try to craft the world the way we would like to see it. I'm saying we collectively as humankind, assuming that most of us are wanting to be nice to each other.
Yeah. Well, with humankind, kindness is the value that will pervade I'm an optimist. Clearly, you're an optimist for engaging this work. What comes to mind? We'll keep this, with all of the innovation that is coming. You'd mentioned that a lot of our institutions are corrupt, and I've been thinking about, or I had Stephen Kotler on the show, episode number 15, and he had mentioned that this is mind blowing. That Ray Kurzweil, the director of engineering at Google, probably the most esteemed, respected futurist on Earth, has forecasted 100 years of innovation from 2020 to 2030. We're going to see as much change as we've seen from 1920 until 2020. So we're talking a major explosion of innovation, of change, these exponential forces that are driving our culture, our rapidly changing, accelerating world aren't letting up, and it's going to be a wild ride.
100%. That might sound ridiculous, but if you think about 2007 was when the smartphone was introduced, right? 2007.
Wow.
That was 13 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, in considering that, what is it? I can't remember which. Is it Maxwell's law or something? The
Moore's
exponential
law. Moore's law.
Was it just Moore's law, or is it? But there's also a Maxwell's law. Anyway,
Okay.
It's one of the two. But like the exponential curve of technology, that is Moore's. Okay. But yeah, like we're seeing that, we're in it, in exponential means that it's not like the water's going to be rising very slowly and we're going to see it. No, it's like the water's like at our feet, and then all of a sudden the water's at our chest, and then the water is like 30 stories above us, like
Explosive.
step by step. Yeah.
Explosive.
Yeah.
Yes. And this is something I read about in Worth the Fight, that I believe that meditation, psychedelic medicines, and flow states are all exponential technologies for the mind. And like we talked about, this is not necessarily about psychedelics. It's about how are we getting into that state of mind, that flow state, and how are we being productive for ourselves, our circles of influence, and the natural world.
Well, Stan Grof is quoted as saying that the discovery of psychedelics for the exploration of mental health and medicine is very much like the discovery of the telescope for spatial exploration. And I think that is kind of what you were saying, and I think that's probably true. And I really think that we're on the cusp of scratching the surface of what we're going to learn, utilizing both these techniques and these medicines.
Well, a lot to be excited about, and it'll be fun to see how this all shakes out. Thank you for taking this time. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. We've done a detour, which I figured would happen, and I love that we got into a bunch of culture,
Sure.
and because that usually is a hot point in our conversations. So thank you for your willingness to being open for that.
Sure.
And do you have any parting words that you would give to anybody that might be on the fence, thinking about a psychedelic experience, thinking about healing?
Well, I mean, so parting words for anybody thinking about a psychedelic experience, if there's any kind of hesitation, step one, don't necessarily do psychedelics first. Honestly, look into different ways of exploring non-ordinary states of consciousness. We talked about breath work. We didn't talk about sensory deprivation tanks. That's another awesome one. Even just sitting by yourself in a room for like a half an hour, that's very difficult for a lot of people, right? But that's where you want to get to be able to feel comfortable with the psychedelic experience. Because if there's, I mean, the thing that tends to get in the way the most is the hesitation. And that's, notoriously people that are a little bit more anxious, they might need a higher dose to be able to kind of get past that, that thing that keeps us connected here. So when you're thinking about psychedelics, just think about it broadly and don't necessarily think about the drug. Just the fact that we are alive on a rock that's floating through the universe and like grass grows on the ground. I mean, like this is completely absurd. Just life. So, I mean, start there.
Love it.
Look at yourself first, and then you can jump in.
Wonderful advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for, again, sharing your insights and wisdom. And where can people find you or get involved with the Chicago Psychedelic Meetup?
Sure. So Psychedelics and the Future of Psychiatry is the name of the meetup. Basically, if you just type in Psychedelic Psychiatry Meetup in any search engine of your choice, you'll probably find it. We also have the Chicago Psychedelic Community, which is a Facebook page. We try to run that a little bit. It's mostly just news stuff. Myself, drmattbrown.com is my webpage. I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Matt Brown, spelled DrMattBrown. And then lastly, I want to give a plug for some of the community work that I do. I work for an organization called Trilogy Behavioral Healthcare that's located here in Rogers Park. We serve the majority of the Chicagoland area. We've got a little over 2,000 clients that we serve, trying to take people out of homelessness, moving people out of nursing homes, reintegrating them into the community. So we're really trying to help the folks that are the sickest. And we're doing good work. We can always use more help. So if you're in Chicago and you want to really help people in need, organizations like Trilogy that pay attention to us, because these folks, no one cares about, and it's really sad. And if we really want to spread a psychedelic message, is trying to recognize who out there is falling through the cracks. Who are we missing?
Beautiful.
Because one of the things that a lot of us learn, or we get the message that it seems like maybe we're all actually connected to one thing, and that we're all just slightly different manifestations of that one thing. And if we're all really just different manifestations of that one thing, and we're allowing other people to struggle, and we just ignore them and let them suffer and die, then we're kind of doing that to ourselves. So think about that.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Matt.
No problem.
Really enjoyed this.
Yeah, you too.
Peace.
Yeah.
This has been Matt Simpson of the Worth the Fight podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You can learn more about our mission of hope and healing at worththefightbook.org. Please rate, review, and share this episode. Please help us expand our circle of influence and get these vital conversations out to our human family. Also, if you are in a financial position to support the show, you can help us push forward these conversations with monthly donations on Patreon. This podcast is a tremendous amount of work for me, and I have stellar guests in the queue. Please help if you can. Thank you for listening to this programming. Much love, y'all. Peace.